Scott Lauber, Philly.com, joins us now as the Philly season is in the books. And, Scott, I know Klentak spoke Monday, which kind of got swept under the rug because the Eagles lost. So it was like, all right, I'll speak now so no one can really pay attention to what I'm saying.
Right, exactly. Good day for it.
Right. McPhail a little bit more yesterday. Of the two, what was there anything that stood out that you took from that you kind of raised your eyebrows at?
Yeah, it's just as well that it worked out the way it did, because I took quite a bit more out of the McPhail session yesterday, and my takeaway from it was that, in listening to Andy McPhail, a veteran baseball man, a baseball executive who's been in the game, close to 40 years, right? 30 years, 40 years. He's sitting there and he's talking about, the season that they had. And, I got the sense that he was about as lost for a solution as anybody else. I mean, he watched for close to 4 months. He watched this team play, really almost as well as any team in the National League. I think at one point, at their height, when they were 15 games over, they also had the second best record in the National League. They hung with the Cubs. They hung with the Dodgers when they played them. They hung with the Red Sox. I mean, they played 4 games against the Red Sox this season that were all very competitive. Nobody was fooling themselves into thinking that they were a World Series team, or that, they were the best team in baseball or anything like that, but they certainly looked contender-ish. And then, mid-August and September comes, and they were maybe the worst team in baseball. I think they were the worst team. I think the Orioles were worse than them by a game or something in August and September, which is saying something given how bad the Orioles were. And there's Andy McPhail sitting there, and he's talking about the inconsistency of the team as a whole and specific players. I mean, he walked in there with a legal pad, and he had numbers on it, and he was talking about Zach Eflin's ERA in June versus August, and Maikel Franco's batting average month to month, and whatever the heck that was from Odubel Herrera this year. And he was about as confused as any of us are who watched the team all year. And then he took it a step further and said, and this is why our offseason is going to be, I think the word he used was dicey, because we meaning the Phillies, have to make assessments and evaluations of these wildly inconsistent players. And it's going to be pretty easy for the Phillies to get these wrong, to buy on the right guys and sell on the wrong ones. So, they're going to have to make some decisions and draw some conclusions after this weird season, and there's a lot riding on it. So they've got a lot of decisions to make. It's not going to be easy. It is going to be, I think, really fascinating to see who they believe is part of their next great team and who they want to walk away from.
Scott Lauber's with us here. He also kind of, I believe this is what you were writing about at Philly.com, which was, I don't want to say he took a shot at Kapler, but he admitted that, hey, you can't be so positive. You got to give these guys, I don't want to say call them out, but everything can't be peaches and cream out there.
Yeah, and look, he brought up Dusty Baker, and he said, he had Dusty Baker as his manager when he was running the show in Chicago, and he said with the Cubs, and he said, we had this conversation with Dusty once upon a time that, it's one thing to want to be positive and to want to prop your players up, and the manager shouldn't be out there ripping his players left and right. That's no way to run a team, and that's no way to get the respect of your players. But at the same time, you have to paint a little bit more of a realistic picture in order to maintain your credibility with your fan base. And that's where Gabe Kapler went over the line this year. Like, I'm understand the positivity, and I understand wanting to prop your players up, and why criticize them? I had a couple of conversations during the course of the year with Gabe Kapler, and he was like, look, it's not my job to criticize a player in public in front of the media. If there's something I need to tell a player, I'll close the door and I'll tell the player. And, I understand all that. But at the same time, when the team is in a tailspin free fall like they were in September, when they get outscored, whatever it was, 70-20 over a 5-game span after they get knocked out of the NL East race, you can't stand there and talk about how they haven't quit, and they're still fighting. And I mean, people aren't stupid, so they're going to see through that. And I think you started to see, they had it was interesting to me hearing Andy yesterday. They had a big meeting on Friday. Gabe Kapler was in a big meeting on Friday that sort of pushed his media availability back. He normally talks to reporters at 4:00 on the day of games, before a night game. I don't think we talked to him until about 5:30 on Friday, and they'd had a big meeting and talked about a lot of things, and you could tell that Gabe had sort of it was a long afternoon, and then the next day he comes out and that was Saturday, where he comes out and he talks about how Odubel Herrera needs to be in better shape, and I certainly bumped on that, and I said, well, where was that all season long? That was as close to critical as he's been. And so, you could certainly see over the course of the past few days that, that message was probably brought to his attention that, look, it's one thing to be a positive guy. It's another thing to just go out there and, say things that are gonna make people that are just gonna lose people, and that's what he did. So a lot of the season. So I think you saw at the end. And I think, you might see going forward a little bit more, I don't know if you want to say frankness, being more candid, maybe painting a more realistic picture of what everybody else is seeing while at the same time protecting his players. You can do it. Terry Francona does it and is very good at it, and that's who Gabe Kapler played for once upon a time. So I think that's kind of where you want to see him fall. Protective of his players, and yet looking like he has a grasp of reality and what's really happening.
Scott, over the next 12 months, we've been talking about this a lot on the show. Who has more pressure, Klentak or Kapler? And then the second part of this question is, if Klentak does not go out and get a big name, what are the expectations next year for Kapler?
The question was over the next how many months?
12 months, yeah, over the next year.
Yeah, I'd say Klentak. Kapler's always going to be polarizing. People are always going to think one way or the other about him. There's not going to be a whole lot of in between. It's just who he is. It's the way he talks. It's his kind of his personality. I think there's going to always be that sort of one extreme or the other for people with Gabe Kapler. But ultimately, it's Matt Klentak who's getting him the players. And I definitely think over the next 4 months, the spotlight is solely on Klentak. And if they don't get one of those big names, if they don't improve the roster, if they don't look on paper like they're a whole heck of a lot better when they start the season next year than when they ended it this year, not going to matter what Gabe Kapler does, because we're going to say they didn't give him the horses. So I think it's on Klentak. He was here first. He's entering his 4th year. There's been a lot of talk about how quickly the Phillies rebuild has gone. Well, into year 4 is when it really should start to turn for the better. If they have a losing season next year, that's on Klentak more than anybody else. So I say it's Klentak. To answer the second part of your question, look, everybody's going to be immensely disappointed if they don't come out of here this offseason with either Harper or Machado. I don't think people expect them to get both. I don't think there's any chance they're going to get both. They really should get one of them. And either of them makes them a much better team. Does it make them the favorite in the National League East by itself? No. I mean, they're going to have to do more than just go get Bryce Harper or go get Manny Machado, but that's a start. A star like that brings people into the ballpark. That's something they need. A star like that brings a little bit more of the buzz back. That's something that they need. McPhail can talk all he wants about how attendance was up over a year ago, but you got to remember they played the Yankees here in the middle of the summer, and that brought in a lot of people. They played the Red Sox here in the middle of the summer. That brought in a lot of people. I still remember a game where Scherzer and Nola pitched against each other at Citizens Bank Park, and I think they announced 21,000 for that game. That's not good, especially when the Phillies were very much in contention at that time. It's not like that game took place last week. So a star like that is going to bring the buzz back, and I think that that they're certainly going to have to go out there and get one of those two guys and then some in order to say that they're markedly better than they were at the end of the season.
Got let me ask you. You got Acuna in Atlanta. You got Soto down in Washington. Two young, guys that you can kind of get excited about. Is Rhys Hoskins on that level?
Probably not. Look, I don't mean that as a knock Hoskins per se. If I'm running a team, I'd love to have Rhys Hoskins in the middle of my lineup. You know, he's a slugger. He's going to hit you 30, 35 home runs. But you know, I don't know that he's a franchise player. I think Rhys Hoskins looks good now and looks even better if he's in the middle of that lineup with Bryce Harper or with Manny Machado. You know, for me, the guy on the Phillies roster, the homegrown guy who to me is a franchise player, is Aaron Nola, and unfortunately he plays only once every 5 days. You know, I think that if you're talking about, we've spent a lot of time focusing on what's wrong, and rightly so. There's a lot wrong with the Phillies and how they're made, how they're built, and how they're made right now. But the one thing that's really right about them is they have a homegrown ace who's under their control for 3 more years, who doesn't even hit arbitration until this winter. You know, and that to me is kind of a lottery ticket in a lot of ways. A lot of teams would love to have that guy, so they don't have to go out and buy their own pitching. You know, you ask a team like the Red Sox, who haven't developed a starting pitcher in 10 years, they'd love to have that guy. They wouldn't have had to go and sell their farm system for Chris Sale and spend $217 million for David Price. So, you know, that to me is your Acuna or your Soto, is Aaron Nola. And then, you know, you can buy your bats. I mean, I think that's one thing that a lot of executives around the game that I talk to have talked about a lot. Grow your pitching, buy your bats. And they have Nola and some other young pitchers who are, you know, they're not aces or anything, but, you know, of Pivetta, Velasquez, and Eflin, I think you probably have 1 or 2 guys in that group that you could see as starters in your rotation, whether it's the back end or what have you. So they've done a decent job at growing their pitching. Now they've got to go buy their bats. Add to what you've got in Rhys Hoskins, who's a fine middle of the order piece, but probably not a franchise talent the way Acuna or Soto certainly look to be.
I agree with that assessment. Scott Lauber, Philly.com, here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. What do you think is Matt Klentak's biggest question he needs answered this offseason?
Wow, there are so many. You know, if you're talking about, you know, internal questions, there's just a huge list of them. I mean, who do you walk away from? You know, I mean, Odubel Herrera to me has value because he still has a team-friendly contract, and if you can find a team out there, and I'm sure that there's a team out there that exists that likes Odubel Herrera, the kind of player that he is, and wants that player for that money, you can trade Odubel Herrera. I believe he has value on the market. But if you're the Phillies, are you ready to walk away from it? Are you ready to walk away from Maikel Franco? Sounds to me like they are. You know, that they've seen enough and they think they know what kind of player he is. But he's also 25, and there's that voice in the back of your head, and I'm sure it's loud in Matt Klentak's head. Like, do you really want to get burned? Because if you trade this guy, and he turns out to be the good version of himself that you have seen at times, you're going to feel awfully silly that you gave up on that guy at age 25. So these are really difficult internal decisions. What do you do with Cesar Hernandez? Do you go forward with him, or is it time to move on, even if you're selling low on a player like him because he didn't have a real good year? You know, I think a huge question is the Hoskins-Santana question. Like, it's pretty clear that they really want to do best for Rhys Hoskins, which is play him at first base.
Yeah.
If you do that, what do you do with Carlos Santana? Is he a good enough third baseman that you can move him over to third, and, you know, Santana at third is better defense for you than Hoskins in left? I'm not sure that they know that that's what the answer to that question is. So there are so many questions just on their own roster.
Shortstop, Scott. I mean, J.P. Crawford was the number 1 prospect in baseball, and, you know, I think Kapler thinks that Kingery's a shortstop. Absolutely. I thought you were referring to Santana as a shortstop. No.
In which case, I mean, he is half the time during the shift, right? Like,
yeah.
That's something else to take into consideration. Can he play that position, third base, the way you play defensively a lot of the time? You know, or do you have to? So all of these things just on your own roster before you even get into which free agent do I like better, you know, Machado or Harper, or which guy's a better fit for my team and my clubhouse, or do I need another starting pitcher? Is Patrick Corbin someone worth going after, or do you want to aim lower, or do you even need a guy? I mean, before you even attack the free agent market, they have so many questions on their own roster to answer. So it's kind of endless in terms of in terms of what the toughest call they have to make.
What about the decision they make a catcher? I mean, do they like Alfaro enough to say we don't want to bring back Wilson Ramos, a guy that they didn't trade a whole heck of a lot to get him, but when he did play, he was one impact bat at least for them.
My sense is that they really like Alfaro and feel like they can go forward with Alfaro as their primary catcher. I mean, I don't think that they've let the ship sail on the idea of bringing back Wilson Ramos, but know this: Ramos is going to want top dollar in the catching market. And while he did hit the ball when he came over here, you also have to remember how limited he was health-wise. How confident do you feel that he's going to be able to play the lion's share of your games behind the plate? So I think they really like Alfaro. I think they feel like they could go forward with him. I think they feel like in certain areas he did make gains this year. He was better at pitch framing, for whatever that's worth. His blocking was not good, but that's something that they feel like they can teach. I think he has raw skills, like his arm is really good. They feel like they can harness that they've got something there. Obviously he swings the bat with a lot of power. Can they harness that power, cut the strikeouts down, and make him a more viable hitter? I think these are things they look at Alfaro and they say, we can teach these things. These are skills that can be learned, and we've got something here. But I think if they go that way, they've got to bring in a veteran catcher to be his backup. I don't think you can go into the season again with two inexperienced catchers the way they did this year. And I think an experienced backup, a guy like David Ross was throughout his career, or a guy like that would do a world of good for Jorge Alfaro to have a guy like that around who he can learn from a little bit in addition to his own coaches.
Then, of course, you have the closing situation. I mean, do they feel like they need a closer, or do they feel like Sir Anthony is that guy, or is it another committee year? I mean, there's another question.
It is, and knowing what you know about Gabe Kapler, I think that unless they decided it was worth it to them to go out and sign a top-of-the-line closer, Craig Kimbrell is a free agent, for example, I think you're going to go into the year without one unless you can go find that guy. And is it worth it to them to go shop at the top of the market for a closer when they have so many other needs? So, again, if I was a betting man, I'd say no. I'd say they're going to stock up on as many good arms as they can to add to the bullpen that they already have, and then they'll go through the year, at least begin the year, the way they ended it with a lot of good arms and not a whole lot of definition to the roles out there, and hope that it works. So, so many different issues at so many different positions, and it's a good thing that they have the month of October before the free agent market opens to kind of get some clarity on this, because they need it. They need as much time as they can get to make some of these decisions.
Phillies beat reporter from the Inquirer Daily News, Philly.com, Scott Lauber, and you can follow him on Twitter at Scott Lauber. And, of course, kind enough to join us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. As he hit on, the Phillies have a plethora of questions to answer as a very important offseason lies ahead. Thank you, Scott.
You bet. Anytime.